name's Ty Faruqi. I'm a photographer exhibiting here.
Could you tell us, how did you find out about the exhibition? How did you get involved?
My first initial steps were really for my own project. I wanted to find out a little bit more about what I would expect when visiting Ukraine. So I contacted the Ukrainian Society, and they put me in touch with a lot of good people in Ukraine, and especially Kharkiv, where I was staying.
That's very nice. Could you tell us, how did you enjoy the works of other people? Because it's very important to compare your work to others, and you must have a certain feeling about the work.
Yeah, sure. Photography is very subjective, but for me, obviously, I have a particular taste. I like to look at very striking images, and obviously the work you got here by Sergei is very striking indeed. He's sort of captured the movement, the essence, and also he's contracted a lot of eye contact in his photographs. So it's very easy to do, but it's also very difficult to portray in an image when it's out in print.
Have you been to Ukraine at all, and how long did you stay there?
I went to Ukraine this year in August time. I stayed there for 9 days. Went to Donetsk and the Luhansk region as well. Stayed there, slept overnight with the soldiers. Got a really good warm welcome from them. They gave up their beds. They didn't even ask me whether I wanted food. They gave it to me anyway. And I just got a really great reception from them.
Tell us, right here, right now, you must have seen people looking at your work. Are you satisfied with the turnaround of people? Do you think you got the message to them through your work?
I'm satisfied with the people that are coming here. I think as a collective togetherness of photographers exhibiting their work, the message got across. We've got elements of culture, we've got elements of the war, elements of history as well. So I really do think that all of them together really do represent what Ukraine is and what Ukraine is about. But I do think that sometimes you can exhibit your work on your own and put your own story across. But for people to understand more, exhibits like these are needed. More of them are needed indeed.
Do you exhibit your own work somewhere? Is it planned to be exhibited somewhere? We can tell people about it, of course.
Yeah, of course. It's going to be exhibited. It's going to be my own, which there's going to be 2 exhibits. One will be focusing on the sort of similarities between Bosnian War and the Ukrainian War. Obviously, 2 different subjects, but also at the same point, they have like very strong similarities in the post-war progression. So, as I sort of touched on earlier, was about the landmine issue. Countries that don't sign up to the Geneva Convention tend to go a little crazy with the planting of landmines. And in Ukraine, it's a very big problem at the moment. No one's really drawing enough attention to it. And I think it really does need to be highlighted before it gets out of hand. In Bosnia, this year I visited there, and they believe that it's going to be a minimum of 30 years before they start seeing any progression. Landmines are going off in the capital of Sarajevo. When mudslides start to come during the rainy season, they slip down further towards the housing, the residential areas. In Ukraine, it's going to be the same issue as well, as if nobody brings any attention to it. And there's no one doing that at the moment. I mean, let alone there being any coverage in the media of the actual war. There needs to be a lot more attention drawn to this aspect, because people live there. And if Donetsk and Luhansk are going to slip away from the Ukrainian authorities, then they're going to be managing themselves, and do they have the resources to take care of themselves? Are they going to be getting any help from Russia? Are they going to get any help from the Ukrainian side? I mean, with the withdrawal of pensions and benefits by the state in Kiev, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a Ukrainian solution, so it's going to have to be an international community and get together, definitely.
Do you think there is enough coverage by the British media of the problem currently? Because I think most people think, oh, it's far away, it's miles away, but really it's 3.5 hours flight.
It's not far away, no. If you put it generally, if you put it into, if you compare where Ukraine is, it's just above Turkey. That's a tourist destination. So how much further can the conflict stretch? Will it stretch any further? I don't know, but yeah, you're right. It's only 3.5 hours. Especially that the flights have all been shut off towards the east, and if you do want to, you have to get a connecting flight from the capital. And that's a big problem when that starts to happen, when you can't get a direct flight to the east. It used to be, obviously, that you were able to, but now they've been shut off. Tourism will bomb, and people will associate the eastern war with the central part of Ukraine as well. Something really does need to be done, and if it's not done now, then when will it be resolved?
Do you think exhibitions like this will help British public hopefully understand the conflict more and understand the tragedy of it rather than just inconvenience?
It does help, but also at the same time we do need an amalgamation of film and pictures. So the films that we had here today, we need more of those. And I think if people are to comprehend the severity of the situation, then we're going to need more filmmakers to come forward, donate their time, their expertise, but also the footage that they've come out with as well. Because we're leaning towards a time in history where everything is more visual. So if you go onto social media now, everything that inspires interest in a person, it comes from film and video. That's why there have been a lot of companies like BuzzFeed who have had a lot of success, and it's because of video. It's not because of anything else. People, the sort of attention spans of everyone is getting shorter and shorter. So pictures help, but film definitely helps as well. For me though, photographs are a lot stronger, but they go hand in hand with film and they go hand in hand with journalism as well.
So what is your focal point of this exhibition? What is your favourite part of this exhibition?
I think for me it was seeing the differences in opinion that people are expressing here today. I think that a lot of the time when you come to an exhibition like this, and I've been to quite a few as well, not for just my own work but for other people's work as well, it tends to, and I'm going to be honest here, it tends to be a vanity project. So here there's a lot of people who actually show a lot of passion for the cause and the problems that are actually associated with Ukraine. So it's great to see divided opinion, because if we're all thinking the same, is it the right way to think, is it not? But divided opinion sparks a lot of conversation and asks a lot of questions, and that's good to see here today, I believe.
Some of my photographs are literally from a few weeks ago. And I know a lot of galleries would want, 3-6 months or a year, to begin planning exhibitions. And so what we're trying to do here is actually very, up-to-date social commentary. So it's a challenge. So I understand why we're here. My hope is that the word will get out to a wider audience.
So hopefully when it does happen and a chance will arise to exhibit your works to the wider audience, you will bring up your friends as well as people who don't support Ukraine yet.
I mean, there have been some opportunities in Oxford where I live, some previous exhibitions in London, some things in Kiev. So yes, I would always be glad. I think the question of how you tap into kind of more mainstream media channels or a broader platform is an ongoing, in a sense, media PR challenge. But I think every step helps. So I think this, even to galvanize the already kind of aware and committed community is quite important. I think and I think it's helpful for people to realize they're not alone in their concern and their frustration about what's happening.
So I know, being a photographer yourself, it's probably a bit conflicting talking about other people's work, but how do you feel when you look at these other pictures, at the photographs, and maybe some pictures of young kids which they draw themselves?
I mean, I find it very helpful, informative to view the works of other photographers. I think it only adds to my own understanding of my craft, and to appreciate the perspective and the opportunities and the view that people have. I mean, some of my work as well has been with children and young people, and so it's difficult. I know firsthand the emotion. I mean, it's not the image here. On the other side, a grandfather who was telling the story of his 2-year-old grandchild who was killed. And, so I have photographs of him, of her sister who survived, and hearing the stories, not only was she killed in tragic circumstances in the war, but after she was buried in the cemetery a few days later, there was another rocket attack and the cemetery was destroyed. So it's like this the emotions almost become overwhelming. It's hard to comprehend them. But I think in a way that process of listening to someone tell their story is quite, can be therapeutic. It can be part of a slow process of healing. I've done some work with soldiers, not too much. And I think, so I'm particularly interested when I see, for example, the work at the airport. That's a particular genre which is, very, very challenging. I think to be right there in the moment of conflict. My work, particularly with refugees, is more almost capturing the story that happens in the quiet moments, almost between the lines of conflict. And I think for many people that's a story that lingers, because I met with this family here. I took this photograph this May, but I had met them for the first time last July. So for almost a year they've been living in temporary accommodation. And I think for many people this really is the challenge. It's the challenge of what is life like now, because this temporary is extending now, and if you have children, you're thinking about school, you're thinking about jobs, and I think for a lot of people there's a real paralysis around the decisions to make. How do we move on? Should we move on? I've left a home behind, I've left work behind, and for me this is the next set of challenges for a lot of both for volunteers and for the people directly suffering. Almost, how do you help people to transition to the next stage of life? Because the idea of being in a shared accommodation, they're sharing a room with 4 other families behind curtains for 11 months. Okay, I mean, they're grateful they're not on the streets, but that is not a sustainable situation. But then, so.
And just the last question about the name Fragile Independence. Do you think this exhibition covers fragile independence, the concept of it, the beauty of the culture and the devastation of the war?
I think it's a very good start. I think I think it's helpful that it's a diversity of images around civilian suffering, war images, wider cultural imagery. I mean, as I shared in my remarks, I think the very name Fragile Independence is quite an intriguing one. And I think in some ways the elements of a fragile independence are very hard to communicate through imagery, things around the building blocks of civil society, because I think that's what's happening in Ukraine right now. That's what's being built. It's actually a much more socially aware democracy and the volunteer spirit. So I think possibly it would have been helpful to have maybe a little bit more of the volunteer spirit, the story of how the community is responding to what's happening in Ukraine. But certainly, as a starting point, I think what's represented here is very, very good.
I really like it. I didn't know how it would look like, and I didn't know what to expect, but it's very good. Yeah, it's very.
How do you like it, sir?
Yeah, of course, it's very nice. Well, and it's nice that you have a piece of history of Ukraine at the start, so you can know at the start what are you looking at really, and the struggle. So yeah, it's nice. It's touching and it's nice. And
I would say it's touchy.
Yeah,
it touches your heart.
What kind of feelings do you get when you look at the peaceful bit of it and when you look at the part from war?
Yeah, mixed feelings.
Yeah, of course.
It's really, it's beautiful in Ukraine.
The part about the peace is very nice. The cities and pictures of Crimea and Kamieniec-Podolski. Yeah, really nice places, and on the other hand, you've got war, so you can see the difference. Drastic. So
do you think it's important to organize events like this in future again?
Yeah, of course, that people know what's going on, otherwise they will not.
Invite more and more people just to let them know about all this.
Lots of people came, so that's nice.
How do you feel? What kind of feelings do you have when you look at these pictures, which show the beauty of the culture, the beauty of the country, and then devastation of the tragedy that we have, the war conflict?
Yeah, it just makes me feel really sad. Yeah, really sad. And I think it's very easy to see things on the news and be kind of disconnected from it. But when you're looking at pictures like that, it's a lot of the pictures, you just get the humanity of it, the people, that they're human beings involved. So, yeah.
Do you think that it's important to organise events like this in order to give a better understanding to the British public of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good to find out more about cultures, and as I say, more of the what's underneath rather than just what you see on the news, which is all quite separated. So yeah, I think it's very good.
Would you come to events like this in future, and would you possibly bring your friends as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We don't get out much.
nice to see you again. We've heard about the exhibition, of course, at the presentation. If you could give us a little tour, maybe, of today? Yeah? Let's go. We can start from the first post and tell us about those little artwork of young kids.
This site is it's mostly very young children under the age of 10 or 10 and 11, early teens, and part of that wall is the theme was how I conquered my fear. So the way that it's connected to the rest of the exhibition is that children obviously they hear what's happening in the country. They hear from their family, they hear from the news, and they're trying to make sense of it. Obviously, many of the children have their parents in the conflict zone. And it's really frightening. It's really frightening for a young mind. They're trying to comprehend what's going on. They're trying to understand why this is happening. And as we had earlier today, a daughter of one of the photographers, she was asking him a question about why is our neighbor, why is Ukrainian neighbor, Russia, why there is a struggle between the two of them, why they're fighting. What's the reason for that? And it was a really good question, especially from a young child, because they're trying to understand, they're trying to make sense of it, obviously. They represent what they feel, and they represent how, maybe how they would like to see the world, how the world is at the moment. As you can see on this side, for example, there is a young girl crying. There's people dying in one part of the country, and then there is a message which says, "I'm afraid of the war, but I believe in the Ukrainian soldier." It sends a message. It sends a message from the young person's perspective. Then there is another one, which is like breaking the shackles. It's a rope, but it's like breaking the shackles. So, and the different. There is a different thing to obviously every single picture. That's a Maidan picture, as you can see, and it's actually really good quality for you.
And there's a sniper.
There's a 15-year-old. Yeah.
And you can see it through the sniper's rifle, I guess.
Exactly.
It's very emotional. It's amazing how kids at such a young age can send a message like that.
Exactly.
The very bright one. What do you think that represents?
That represents Ukrainian soul. I think for me personally, because every person sees the picture in a different way. So for me personally, it looks like that's a Ukrainian soul, and I'm not quite sure about what the emotion is, but it's
because I couldn't help but read.
It's hope, but I don't know. It's hard to explain, to be honest.
I couldn't help but read that these pictures are from a small village miles away from the conflict zone, and still kids are involved and they think about that. Is that throughout the Ukraine, do you think?
It is, and even as we go along, we'll see some of the pictures from the part of the Ukraine, from most of the Ukraine, where the conflict is not actually happening, but you can still have the media talking about it every single day. Kids are exposed to it at school. The families, they ask those questions. So they want to know, they want to understand what's going on, and obviously it's happening throughout the country. It's not only happening in Ukraine. You could see in the news, in Europe, in the US, everybody was talking about what's going on, because it's in Europe. It's basically almost in the middle of Europe, what's going on. So it's, of course it's...
Let's move on to the next one. It's very conflicting emotions when you look at the board and you see some of the cultural places in the Ukraine, and then you can see the war and the conflict and the devastation, really.
This is the contrast we are trying to show. This part of the country was at some point, not long ago, was very similar to this. Maybe not the architecture. Architecture was different because it's a more modern area. That's really old, and that's Kyiv. This is the new monument, but you have some of the old architecture on here. But what we are trying to show on the stands, and pretty much most of the stands they actually work in this way, is that we're trying to show the contrast or a story. So in this case, it's a contrast.
And in here, it's very peaceful and tranquil on this side. And you can almost feel the same tranquility and the easiness from the guys who are surrounded by war, by bullets, and still they keep their optimism.
Somebody said before, and I think many of the people, especially the ones who were in the war zone, those guys in there, they fight for each other. They support each other, and they're trying to make the best out of the time that they have together. When the ceasefire is in place, when there's no bullets flying, they're trying just to survive. You can see that they're probably from all different parts of the country, but they become friends. They become friends because the only person they have in that place is the person next to them.
If I've heard anything about the Ukraine, is the spirit of the Ukraine is the spirit of togetherness, and I guess you can see it from these pictures. My personal favorites, and maybe you can help me talk about them, are these two pictures. The one of the father, which is really alive, and you can imagine maybe the fear that the kid has and the happiness that he has in being with his father. And my personal favorite is the one of a little dog by the soldier's feet.
Dogs is man's best friend, as they said, and those little puppies, obviously, there's war going on there, and I mean there's a lot of stray animals. There's a lot of stray dogs, obviously, from probably they had a home one day, and maybe the home doesn't exist anymore. And the soldiers, obviously, because it gives them a little bit of that warmth of a home, and as much as I can understand from my perspective, this beautiful little puppy, you know.
Yeah, I feel the humanity of the Ukrainian soldiers when I look at it.
I'm not afraid of him.
I've heard a lot today about Serhiy Loiko's pictures. Is there any reason why he stands out to most?
The main reason that he stands out is that he has been covering conflict for many years. He has covered most of the conflicts which happened within the ex-Soviet states and where the ex-Soviet states were involved. And he also works for Los Angeles Times, which gives him that extra piece of credibility. He is the only photographer, he is the only journalist who was allowed into the Donetsk airport during the standoff between the two sides. He spent 4 days in there, and the pictures that you see in here is the part of his series about the airport, which is also came into the book, which recently released. It's called The Airport, and as far as I know, it will be translated into English as well. In this book is mostly the stories of the soldiers themselves, their conversations. The way he explained it, he didn't actually change much because it had to be real. So, as he said in his interview that many of those men that he photographed, they didn't actually make it. Didn't actually make it after that. But he shows the soul of the Ukrainian soldier. They have been there for 290 days, which. If you look at the place, this was a brand new terminal built for the Euro 2012. Look what's happened.
So actually, people who come to your exhibition or will come to exhibition in the future has a unique opportunity to feel the fear and the devastation and the heroism of those people who spend their last few days in the airport of Donetsk.
Yes, and I think that it's important to send this message across, and it's important that people see the actual faces. They don't just hear about this on the news. They actually see the faces of those people who are there, and perhaps in the future, I really hope that those soldiers are going to be looked after when they come back from the war zone.
Many think that this must be the stars, but it's actually the bullet holes, are they?
Yes, they are. Yeah, this is the result of the shelling. And this picture, this is probably one of my favorites. The way that it presents, that's what he calls it, stars, because it's you can see the level of devastation from the inside. You can see how the sun actually shines through all those holes in there. It's unbelievable. It's a really good quality picture. A photographer obviously has the eye for it.
So this stand does show actually the aftermath of what is going on at the moment, which is still going on, although many people think it's gone because of the ceasefire, but it does continue, doesn't it?
It continues. There is many people in that area, especially. All that they can see in the part that they live is what they see on the news, which is shown there, which basically is built in the way for people to dislike Ukraine even more. And this is really painful. It's really painful. You can see those people, they lost everything. They lost everything that they have.
On this stand, you show us a bit of Ukrainian culture, the tradition, against, again, our soldiers, our heroes, who are fighting for this culture to continue.
This stand probably represents the initial idea of this exhibition. Is the contrast of the Ukrainian beauty and the actual conflict at the moment. Women in those photographs, they are family members of Ukrainian soldiers. You have daughters, wives, mothers of the soldiers. And they are dressed in national Ukrainian dress from different regions, different epoch, if you can say, for example. And on the other side of the stand, you have the men, which could as well be their husbands. And this is the connection between the two, another connection, which brings us back as well to the children's drawings. If a soldier receives this from a child and he hangs it in his tank, it gives him that thought and it gives him that reason what he's fighting for.
What does it actually say on that picture?
It says, preserve the sun. Preserve the sun for me.
Again, the contrast is very visible, but why the destruction against the happy faces of children?
The part where the destruction is happening, it gives another message of the conflict in the east and the destruction which it caused to the actual villages, towns in the east. On this side is the family members, or actually the children of the soldiers. So what it's trying to represent is that their fathers, their mothers, in some cases as well, they're actually trying to stop this at this point. So that's where the contrast comes in here.
I will ask you another question just about this stand, because as I understand, the photographers take a big part in delivering the messages, talking about the conflicts. But this project, Children of the Heroes, that shows that not only they concentrate on delivering the message about the war, but also they're trying to make somebody else's life a bit more normal. Is that the aim of that project, do you think?
I think this project is trying to represent the cause, the reason why it's worth defending your country for your future. This is the future.
What is it exactly? What is the aim of this little exhibit here?
This little exhibit brings you face to face, if you can say, brings you face to face with the conflict. Because those are actual boots and gloves from the war zone. So they were worn by the soldiers, and they have their own story. If you have a look at it, they're completely worn out. This is how hard it is for the soldiers, and that's in the east. It's a night and day ongoing fighting, obviously.
And of course, you've got the stand here of the Ukraine aid. Could you tell us about the ways, maybe how to find out about the Ukraine aid more, if one of our viewers will want to help?
Yes, Ukraine Aid is a charitable organization which supports this project. It was we approached Ukraine Aid with our idea. So Yulia approached Ukraine Aid with the initial idea, and they decided to help us. So everybody got involved. So Ukraine Aid and Fragile Independence team got involved, and this is what happened. Ukraine Aid is helping not only soldiers, it's helping the soldiers, it's helping the families of the soldiers, and it's also helping other people who were displaced or in any other way affected by the conflict.
And this stand, what is it all about? Is that about the contrast again?
This is the beautiful Ukrainian architecture. This is the landscapes, this is the Carpathian Mountains. And then on the other side, you have broken homes. This is the broken homes in the east. Those are maybe not in the news, but the animals who were pets once to someone. Anything could have happened to their owners. They could have left the conflict zone. They could have died, and their pets were left there. If you have to take everything with you, you need to take what's essential. And I guess this puppy here, he was wounded. So I understand that either the soldier or whoever looked after it just bandaged the leg. And there's a boy, you see.
I guess that's his playground now.
Yes, it is. Has to be, and it's really heartbreaking. And this is another part. This is more about those coming back from the conflict zone, and you can see children meeting the veterans. This particular picture, it shows that the child is not afraid because she has men to fight for her. And this is like a combination from Ivan Bogdan and Tai Faruqi, who was one of our photographers present at the press conference today. Just day-to-day life of the soldiers, and as another best friend
So, generally speaking, we've seen lots of people who showed their emotion, especially in watching the movie. Do you think you've reached your aim? Do you think you've shown what you wanted to show?
It's a difficult question to answer. I'm certain that we did raise some awareness. As in any other case, it can be always improved. I'm quite pleased with the turnout, and I hope we'll have same or more tomorrow. And I think that it would be really good to preserve it, maybe develop it, show it to a wider audience.
So you do have plans of expanding it and maybe showing it somewhere else?
We definitely do. It's quite difficult to reach the non-Ukrainian audience in the same way as it is to reach the Ukrainian, because they have a different mentality, they have a different life, and it's very difficult to find the medium to actually reach out to them and for them to understand it, and to actually, if they understand it, they would know they're coming here, but why they're coming here, and they would actually want to see. There is a lot going on in Europe at the moment, so it's tough. It's tough, but I'm optimistic about this. I'm optimistic, and I'm really happy with the actual progress of the exhibition, and I really hope that we can actually make it into hopefully something bigger, perhaps a different venue. There are costs involved with that, and I understand that we would need to find a sponsor, perhaps, and for someone who would like to support, who would like to get involved in this, and just help us to send this message through.
Well, we hope to hear very soon from you. Hopefully you will find a venue, you will find a sponsor, and we will see much more pictures of these beautiful photographers, a beautiful culture, and a very beautiful country indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
concept of the exhibition, Fragile Independence, was conceived by 3 young Ukrainian professionals. Katya Zhukova will speak about it shortly, but also I would like to mention Yulia Shian and Katya Bell and Igor Gritsko, who were organizers of the exhibition, and Ukraine Aid simply was channeling efforts of the Ukrainian community. I should say that there is a great volunteer movement among Ukrainians in London. I would like also to thank sincerely to Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, and Volodymyr Pavlyuk will say short greetings as well on behalf of the association.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain London branch, I warmly welcome you to our community centre. Thank you for coming and supporting this worthy cause, Ukraine Aid, also the Ukraine struggle in this war against our northern neighbour. We wish you all the best, we wish everyone all the best, that you continue to support the Ukrainian cause and their fight for a democratic and independent Ukraine. And also it's being born of Ukrainians and our fathers who came here after the war, built community centres, built churches. It seems strange after so many years here that we seem to be back to square one and we're continually fighting for independence. It seems no end. And thank you once again for coming and wish you all the best for the future. Thank you.
Let me pass now to Katya Zhukova, who was one of the organizers of the exhibition in the first place, and she will talk about the concept.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming. It means a lot to all of us. So I just would like to say a few words about the exhibition itself. So as Ukrainian anthem goes, souls and bodies will lay down all for our freedom. Currently Ukrainians are forced to prove it with their actions, not just their words. And unfortunately for many of those, it costs their lives, and it's very tragic for the country. So Fragile Independence is the photography exhibition dedicated to all those who are currently protecting integrity of Ukrainian territory and its independence. As current events in Ukraine show, peace is fragile and it can be easily lost when you the least expect it. We have to stay united, we have to stay all together to preserve it, as the world is too small and we never know when and where the disaster might strike next. We would like to show you Ukraine that you're probably not used to seeing in the news. Ukraine that can be seen by those who have been born and brought up there and who are now fighting to protect its independence. It's a very beautiful and culturally rich country that is now torn apart by an unwanted war. I would also like to mention that all proceeds from this charitable exhibition will be forwarded to Ukraine Aid and will be used to help those affected by the conflict that is devastating the east of the country at the moment. And now I would also like to introduce two photographers whose works are present at the exhibition but who are not present today, unfortunately. I would like to draw your attention to the blue stand on the right-hand side from you that has the photographs of a famous photographer and reporter from the Los Angeles Times. His name is Sergei Loiko, and he was the only one photographer who has had access to Donetsk airport at the time of one of the worst fights for it. He was living with known heroes who were fighting for the airport for many long days. He stayed there for 4 days, documenting these fierce fights. And he's also written a book about this airport. The book is also present at the exhibition and is available for purchase. And the second photographer I would like to introduce, Tichin. We will be able to watch the short movie that he's put together in a few moments, but I'd just like to introduce him to you as well, as his movie and his works. They represent the main theme of our exhibition, the contrast between the unwanted and unnecessary war and the beauty of the country and its people. He has depicted family members of the soldiers who are now protecting their land. Mostly it's their daughters, wives, mothers, beautiful women wearing Ukrainian national dresses. As he said, he wanted to make this project to remind the soldiers who are they defending, who are they protecting, and who are waiting for them to come back home. So you will be able to see his works on the stands here, and in a second we will be able to watch the movie that he's put together. And once again, I want to thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate all of you being here today, and it makes a huge difference not only for us but all that we are supporting. Thank you.
Високе небо, небо сі, шляхи далекі, стигле мовчання на чистих волях, на руїнах, тернова ружа цвіла коханням. Тернова доля спогадом білим кружляєш в небі. Тернова доля, тернова ружа, іду до тебе, іду до тебе.
До бою, перша!
Нас розлучили
me remind you that was a piece, a video clip called Letters to the Front. It was made by Ivan Tramchyshin and Studio Treti Pivni. The wonderful costumes you've seen on Ukrainian ladies there, they're from Lviv Ethnographic Museums. And the idea was to show the historic continuity of Ukraine as a European borderland that was fighting off the aggression from the east. In the Middle Ages it was called Loca de Ferta in Latin, or wild fields. And this clip represents women writing letters to their husbands or sons who are fighting on the Eastern Front at the moment. So now let me introduce our next speaker, Ben Robinson. Ben is a photographer living in Oxford, on my far left. After reading politics, philosophy and economics at Oxford University, Ben went to Ukraine to work and study in 1995. Initially he planned for 2 years and stayed more than 15, working with the Center for Leadership Development and Kiev Business School. In May 2015, Ben traveled to Zaporizhia, Berdyansk and Mariupol in southeastern Ukraine, as well as a number of smaller villages affected by the recent conflict. And the purpose was to document what's happening and to help counter disinformation prevalent in the media. So now we will hand over to Ben and he will tell about his experience.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm less familiar being this side of the camera, so it's actually a good experience. It makes me realize how my subjects feel a lot of the time. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a short visit to come from Oxford, so it's great to see you. And to see the video as well, as an introduction to our discussion today and as a background for the exhibition. You know, the beauty you see in the film is very powerful, and also you sense the resilience, you know, the perseverance of people, in a way stubbornness, which I have come to certainly appreciate, perhaps even love, you might say. But I want to talk for a few minutes about the words fragile independence. I thought it was quite an intriguing title for this exhibition. The word fragile, you know, you imagine moving house, you know, and you have a box, and it might say fragile on the side, and it would often have a picture of a wine glass or something. And it would give you some fairly basic guidelines. It would tell you this way up. Right? We put an arrow, you know? And so you're looking at this box, you're led to understand that there's something of delicate nature inside. And obviously it's up to you what you're going to do with that. Right? I mean, you can drop that box. You can turn it upside down, you can turn it on its side, you can put something heavy on top of it. You do what you want with the box, but it's giving you an indication that something inside is of value. And for me, when I think about independence and the fragility of independence, it's because there are certain things, in the same way as you imagine this way up on the box, there are certain things that come together to make independence possible. Right? You think about the rule of law, think about the freedom of the press, you think about the freedom from intervention in the borders, keeping sovereign borders. You think about these dimensions that make, you know, a healthy independence possible. And you start to take those away, you reveal the fragility. But I think, for me, it kind of then leads on to the next question. Is fragile mean weak? Because there's a lot of discussion, you know, in the media around, you know, political views of, you know, strength. What does it mean to present strength? And certainly a lot of talk around that as it relates to Putin and Russia's actions in foreign policy. And what does a projection of strength look like? And is a country that is battling for independence, is a country that is experiencing these moments, these images that we see around us, the ones that I've personally experienced. Is that weakness? And that's where I would actually say that the fragility actually hides something that's very strong inside. And in a way, the strength, you might say, of independence of a country is how it cares for its most vulnerable within its borders. And for me, some of the most moving things I've experienced, when I've taken photographs, say, of the displaced, the Perestrelci, all around Ukraine, people in government camps in Krasnoyarsk, I'm just trying to remember, near Zaporozhye, and also people, fascinatingly, who have come from the east and been moved, living now in the west of Ukraine. And for me, the whole mixture of complicated stories is very powerful. I've seen volunteers that are taking supplies into places where people accept those and want that help, but at the very same time are angry and bitter and are blaming those that are bringing help. Perhaps in some ways even wishing them harm, giving their position to separatist forces. And I asked my friends who are volunteers in this situation, why do you keep going then? Why do you keep going? And it's because, the answer that comes back is because we are a country, and this is what you do. And I think the real strength of a country comes out in moments like these. How you help those that are most vulnerable, and how you even help those who are perhaps opposed at the moment to being helped. Now this is very controversial, I realize, and it's not simple. And I've been in situations where people have stopped that help, because in some ways it's perhaps promoting a kind of dependency, which is unhelpful. There's lots that I could say, and I will close shortly, just to open to questions for my colleague. When I spoke recently at the Ukrainian Institute with perhaps a fuller collection of some of my photographs, I used an analogy that comes from the Bible, from the Old Testament, and the life of Solomon. And for me, it remains a quite striking analogy. And you may be familiar with the story, you may not, but Solomon prays and asks God above all things for wisdom. And in the story we read in the Old Testament, God grants this wish, and he's given wisdom. And this wisdom is put to the test immediately. Two women come before him and are both claiming to be the mother of a child. One of the mother's children died in the night. Perhaps they rolled over on the child and suffocated. So they both are claiming to be the mother of this child. And Solomon's difficult task is to try to determine who is telling him the truth. And he proposes back to the women. He said, all right, if you can't agree, let's cut this child in half and you each have half. And the false mother, the one who knows that her child is in fact dead, says, all right then, that seems fair. The real mother, who knows in her heart that this is her child, says, no, I'd rather you take this child. And for me it's very powerful, because a lot of what's happening, particularly in the East, in these times of conflict, you see one side that doesn't really care, right? They are happy for chaos and division.
because for them that is an outcome that is acceptable. The side that cares, the Ukrainian people as a nation, many that I've come to know, are left then with the very difficult moral choices. Because for them it's not acceptable to cut a child in two, it's not acceptable to cut off people. You are then left with the very difficult moral choices. And for that, I support my friends that are in that position. And I think in some ways these photographs are a small testament to that spirit. And in my comments in the press release, I do have hope, because I think, like this fragile box, it has something very precious inside. And I think more and more people are realizing and accepting that. Thank you. I hope that's helpful.
Let me introduce Tai Faruqi. Tai is a professional photographer based near London. He specializes in product and portrait photography. Tai has worked with both corporate organizations and small businesses that commission his work, and presently he is focused on domestic and international social and political issues. His most recent work involves uncovering the roots of one of the lines of his ancestry which began in Ukraine. So he will tell us about the story that began as a personal story, and that became also a set of photographs to remember.
Hi there, my name's Tai. So as Oleg said, I'm sort of going on a bit of a personal quest at the moment because of this little young lady here. This is my daughter, and she really kind of set it all off for me. Because she started asking about our ancestry. So for me, I don't really know much about my ancestry except where I'm from, both sides of my family, my mother and my father. My mother has Ukrainian and Polish roots on her side, and my father has Afghanistani and Pakistani roots on his side. So it's a bit of an amalgamation of different genes. But the project got started this year, and it really touches and focuses on not just my genealogical roots, but also my memories of my father, who passed away when I was quite young. Didn't really get to know him either, so it was more intriguing for both myself and also my little one. So we started in Bosnia this year, and that really sort of took focus on more of a memory of my father. And then shortly after, it started in Ukraine, which was quite a fascinating insight, because initially, when I told people I was going there, the first thing that they said to me was, "Why are you going there?" And I can understand why, because we have a huge presence in this country of certain television news stations who have taken a very big stance in the war, putting their opinion in. And it hasn't really left much for the positive side of the Ukraine and the fight that the army is actually taking to the front line. So, and essentially, I was also a bit blighted as well. I was kind of fixated on what the press was telling us here, and most of it was actually coming from the perspective of hooliganism and fascism, because BBC have done quite a few programs that were centred around sort of hooliganism. There's also one particular program which focused on fascism, and it was really just sort of zeroing in on certain groups. And we have groups here, we've got particular groups here who are very fascist. And if we wanted to make a documentary about those groups, we could make Britain look like a very fascist state. But it's not, and the same as Ukraine. As soon as I got there, it was one of the first things I actually realised was that it was far removed from the truth, and I wanted to stay. So when I was there, I had so much freedom, it was unbelievable. And coming back to the UK, I had more anxiety here than I did there. And that is mostly due to the media. The difference in the media here, obviously, is a big focus on the war on terror, which is a huge sort of influence on how people feel feel manipulated by the media as well. And I assume, obviously, as well, it's the same thing in Ukraine. We have a big gap in understanding for both the public, but also the media. We don't really seem to have a giant conclusion on what is actually happening in Ukraine. There are so many different opinions as to what is actually happening there. And it's very obvious as soon as you set foot in the country, and once you go to the ATO zone, it's very obvious what is going on there, because the soldiers, when you meet the soldiers, when you meet the people there, it is a completely different sort of atmosphere as to what is portrayed on the news. I stayed with the soldiers on the front line. They gave up their beds. First thing they did was they didn't question me. They didn't say, "Who are you?" I got, obviously, because as soon as you jump into the ATO zone, which is the zone of operations, you're questioned. Everything is kind of against you. So, but it's not because of your race, which is what you kind of have over here. Over there, it's completely different. It's more a matter of what you're actually doing, what you're doing there, and what's on your camera. Is it really a camera? And as soon as you get past all those questions, you're just greeted with a warmth which is completely different to the perspective we actually have here. And as I said, the soldiers were fantastic. All they did was wanted to show me how they can actually encompass their sort of rules of life and how what they're actually fighting for as well. And it was very simple. It was very, very easy to find out what they were fighting about. And it was essentially fighting for their country. There are lots of countries in the world that are fighting for the regain of their land. And in Ukraine, it's no different. And I really do feel that the media over here hasn't really helped as much as they could have. So you can see it in the photographs here as well, how the difference between completely. You can, as soon as you see these photographs, you will see the difference in opinion completely. So, but you'll see in Ukraine this big difference of this sort of analogy of freedom that we feel we have here and over there. But coming back to the idea of what the soldiers were fighting for, I really do feel that I really want to say the name of the TV news station, but I can't see. But yeah, so I'm getting my words in over there because I really do feel passionate about the Ukrainian situation. But yes, Ukraine. It does have a fragile independence in its history. It really has continued from a very long lineage from the Soviet Union. And when I left the UK, my daughter she actually knew the history of it, and it was simply through the ideas of of World War II, the Soviet Union. And one of the things that she straight away knew was that there is fighting there, and that was before I even told her that there was a war in Ukraine. So I really do feel that if an 8-year-old can actually pick up on what's actually happening there, then I think it should be very easy for anyone else.
I have actually a question to Ben. I noticed that you've been to Berdyansk and you observed internally displaced people there. We had recently an inquiry from a family of volunteers who live in Berdyansk, and they said there are about 13,000 refugees there, and they're looking after 2,500 people. So the reason why they wrote to Ukraine Aid, they said, look, we are desperate because there are children who left their homes, they have nothing, they're destituted. And if you can send any help, please do, because we pretty much need everything. And we asked them, what exactly do you need? And they said, well, whatever you can send, from toiletries to basically food parcels and clothes, whatever literally the community can do. And I wonder, what was your experience in Berdiansk and those cities?
Bryansk, I was more transiting through, to get to Mariupol and to villages more on the front line, like Renitna, where I spent most of the time. So that was more a situation of people still very much in a kind of trapped zone, where perhaps for reasons, often for reasons of health, they've yet to evacuate. So I met a lot of elderly or people that were in quite poor health, who were basically, confined to their beds. And there it was clearly the very urgent life and death situation, really, of basic supplies, food and water. We came in for an afternoon, not really expecting we'd be able to reach that village, and because there were numerous military checkpoints, but we were given permission to travel. When we got to the village, the mayor, the head of the local council, gave us a list. She quickly wrote out a list of people that she felt were most vulnerable. And she'd been doing a remarkable job. I mean, this is a village where there's, power is often out. There's very little access in and out. So she's often making a quite difficult journey to bring pension money into the elderly in this town. So we had this list. We went around the houses the best we could. And in one place, the people weren't home. But as we were leaving, an elderly lady from the next door came out and very kind of, in a very sheepish, kind of quiet way, just said, "I see you're delivering supplies. Do you happen to have an extra box?" And we wouldn't have, except that this one family wasn't home. And so we said, yes, we do. And she said, "Well, I'd be very grateful because I haven't had anything to eat all day." And, at moments like this, and I know they're repeated countless times and in countless towns, but it's very moving. You wish there was more to help. You wish there were, I think in a few of those conversations, though, that afternoon, and in some of it comes out in some of the photographs, when people are really quite overcome with emotion, with a real desperation. And I think part of the message, though, was to say, look, you didn't, this help today wasn't expected, right?
Was expected.
Huh?
Was expected. We always felt that situation is not fair.
Okay.
And we always felt that Russia are enemies of Ukraine.
Yes, perhaps you don't understand what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in this situation, in terms of the immediate help that is being provided by the community, there was no, all I was saying is there was no reason to know that would come today. And all we were trying to say as a way of being hopeful is, have hope that there will be more help coming. That's all I'm saying.
My question to both Ben and Ty, basically, what do you see the way forward for reconciliation of this conflict? Because even if Donbass is ever going to come back to Ukraine, we'll have to live with people who are fighting perhaps on the other side of the trenches. What do you see the immediate thing that needs to happen for this conflict to reconcile?
I think reconciliation is a long time away, simply because there's so many background activities that we don't see. And the longer the media, as I said, the media is a very big part in this, and it is also to do with, obviously, these refugee crisis that's going on. That is a big problem. Well, it's not a big problem, but it is part of the issue as to why there's not more coverage of the Ukrainian war. But I think reconciliation is a long time away until media spotlight comes back to it. But as I said again, a lot of it is background activity that we are not actually seeing. Going back to your point actually about the volunteers, they do a stand-up job. A lot of that comes because this ties into your question as well. The government in Ukraine, they're doing a lot, but they're also not doing a lot. And a lot of that comes back to the weaponry they receive, the uniforms they receive. A lot of this comes from abroad. So little things like this need to be, attention needs to be brought to this first. Once these have been resolved, these problems, then they can really start moving forward and start to, if they want to, and start to actually resolve the problems that are actually occurring on the front line. It may be a diplomatic solution, but a lot of the soldiers there were telling me that they don't actually feel this will actually go away. They actually feel that it will escalate in anything, if anything.
In different conflicts in recent times, we often have this phrase that goes together, truth and reconciliation, commissions, that in a very deliberate and slow way try to rebuild and bring about, cohesion in a community. And I think it's powerful that those two words have to come together. Reconciliation in the sense of, a ceasefire, peace, let's stop the killing, let's try and bring about peace. But the truth is actually quite a powerful concept. And I think this is where we're still very great distance away from bringing about that kind of lasting reconciliation. Because on the other side of this conflict, on almost every point, from the beginning of the conflict to the present, there is a very distinct lack of truth. And it has become so deeply embedded that it's hard to see how they will unravel and unpack that and actually come to a place of honesty. And that's where, again, back to what I was saying at the beginning around fragility, actually part of what I see in Ukraine over this last year, 2 years, is actually a growing honesty. And part of that honesty leads to frustration, like this lady is saying here. And it's not just the frustration of this year. It's a frustration about, a multitude of missed opportunities in terms of governance, decisions, allocation of resources, transparency. Not serving self-interest, but serving the country. And this is a struggle for 20-odd years. Well, more, many generations, but let's just focus in more recent times. And I think there's an honesty now, which is by no means, resolved. There's a constant battle. And I don't want to get into a lot of the current political debates. I appreciate there's a lot of frustration, but I also believe there has been some encouraging progress last 2 years. So that honesty, if you like, and I think you see it too because Ukraine and Ukrainian media and Ukrainian discourse is not afraid to be self-critical. No one here is, there's no pressure to praise Poroshenko for every decision he makes, or his cabinet. There's no pressure to kind of somehow produce a sanitized version. There's the freedom to actually be very self-critical around things like the refugee response, around all kinds of things. And you don't see that on the other side at all. And that's why, I fear that we're some ways away from this kind of resolution. But I believe firmly that any resolution in the long term will have those two components, truth and reconciliation.
Hello, my name is Shreya, and my question is why Russians and Ukrainians are enemies, because I don't know much about Ukraine because I didn't know my nana was half Ukrainian. I would like to know why they're enemies.
Thank you. Children knows the best questions.
It's very long and complicated. A lot of it is most likely to do with history. And that sounds like a very vague answer, but history really does repeat itself. And sometimes in different ways, and this is just a different way. I'm sure that a lot of the Russian and Ukrainian people like each other, but there are different people who have a bigger control of that politics that want different. So it's very long and complicated, but it really does lie in the sort of hands of history. And I think you know a lot about it from your homework in Russia you did.
I would actually say, and in fact my child of a similar age asks us the same question at night, and there are times when the answers can be surprisingly simple. And I've told my son, I said, you know, there's times when a bully wants something, and a bully tries to be strong. You may think he's strong, but in fact he's afraid, and is actually quite weak, and he's afraid more than anything else that he will be seen to be weak. And for me, I know that's a very simplistic distilling of events, but I honestly, you know, when I look over the last 2 years, all the way back, you know, before Maidan, November leading up, it's a dangerous thing to have a neighbor that is actually having a democracy when you don't have it. And it's dangerous if you think your people will want to start asking the same questions of their own government. That to me is at the end of the day. And everything else is just smokescreen. Everything else about, let's find someone else to blame. You know, it must be the Americans, they're always to blame. They're always, you know, it's just, it becomes quite ridiculous. You know, the list of reasons. But for me, at the end of the day, it's about fear.
I'd just like to add to that as well. Ben made a really good point there about people being very fearful. And also, when it comes to different countries that are involved, I think the international community has a big part to play. And when it comes to Russia and also America, they also need to watch their military movements as well globally, because although we can actually look at Russia as an oppressor, which they are in this particular instance, we also need to look at the bigger picture as well. We need to look at where foreign forces are actually stationing themselves. Do think actually sometimes a lot of the war games that go on around Russia, not in Ukraine but outside of Ukraine as well, do provoke not just Russia but other countries as well. Because they do see this as an aggressionist force, but also Russia do the same also. So I do think it is a massive picture that needs to be read and actually looked at before we actually make any sort of judgment. I'm sure there's actually lots that world leaders actually know that they're not actually telling us, but I also do think that truth really is out there, but we just need to really just puzzle it and put it together. It's not as simple as we actually do think it is.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now I will know what to tell my daughter, why Ukrainians and Russians are in conflict.
When I introduced myself at the beginning, I'm probably a weirdo here because my parents came after the war, and I think the context of this Russian-Ukrainian confrontation just can't be taken over the last 2 years, You know, I'm sure there are Russians present here, and I apologise for what I'm about to say, but this historical confrontation has been going on maybe for the last 200-300 years. It's not something that's happened over the last 2 years. You know, Ukrainian independence, the road to independence, to having your own culture, language, traditions, has been going on for, you can say, 50, 60, 100, 200 years. You know, and I apologise again. Russia is a big country, It has yet to become a great country. And once it starts to recognise and respecting its neighbours, then that's when Russia will generally be accepted onto the world stage. And there are many Ukrainians in Russia that do get on there, but because I'm speaking generally from what my parents told me, what my father told me, My father told me when he came to this country after the war, my father told me when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s about the Moscow, the Russian neighbour. Until the Ukrainians start to accept themselves, that the northern neighbour will always have this bias, unfortunately, a total disregard for Ukrainians. I'm not saying it's a racist disregard, but I'm saying that's something that we should really address, and we should really address to the Russian people themselves. Russia is a big country, it's about time we became a great country.
Separatists who just searched them, and that just portrays you how complex it is. And I am a Ukrainian citizen. And I wouldn't be able to be totally objective, covering with aggression, because it's an aggression against my country. I can say it was personally a difficult situation for me. I was born and grew up in Luhansk, eastern Ukraine. And this city is at the moment on the temporary occupied territory. And I cannot travel there as a Ukrainian citizen and as a human being. There is no way for me to travel there. So it has an impact on me, how I perceive this conflict.